Mama Eghosa belonged to a clandestine cult that promised its members longevity and power. Her involvement had begun in her youth, driven by fear and desperation after losing her first child to illness. She sought solace in the cult's promises, hoping to protect her remaining children and herself from the inevitable fate of death. For years, the cult's rituals had kept her alive, but now, at the age of 85, her time was running out. Her family, unaware of her secret life, adored her. Her daughter Isosa and son-in-law Osato often brought their young son Hizogi to visit. Hizogi, or Ehi as they fondly called him, was a bright and cheerful boy, the light of Mama Eghosa's old age. The little boy's innocence and laughter filled her home with joy, a stark contrast to the dark rituals she practiced in the dead of night. The cult had warned Mama Eghosa that every extension of her life required a greater sacrifice. As the years passed, she'd given up much: her wealth, her health, even her peace of mind. But the most harrowing requirement was yet to come. The cult elders informed her that to secure another 10 years of life, she would need to offer a blood sacrifice, one from her own bloodline. The choice was hers. She could refuse and accept death, or she could choose one of her own descendants to take her place in the afterlife. The thought tormented her. How could she possibly choose between her own life and the life of her beloved grandchild? This turned her into sleepless nights as she wrestled with her conscience. She prayed, fasted, and sought answers, but the silence of the gods only deepened her dread. The cult's members, sensing her hesitation, reminded her of the consequences of refusal. Her soul would be cast into eternal darkness, an existence worse than death. One evening, Mama Eghosa sat on her veranda, watching Ehi play with his wooden toys. His laughter was a balm to her troubled soul. She thought of the moments they had shared, his first steps, his first words, and the joy he brought into her life. Yet the shadow of her impending decision loomed over her like a dark cloud. The final night came, the night of the ritual. Mama Eghosa had made her decision, though it shattered her heart. She'd convinced herself that it was the only way. She could not face the terror of the afterlife that awaited her without the sacrifice. She could not bear the thought of leaving this world, of not seeing Ehi grow up, of not being there for her family. She justified her decision with the belief that she could protect her family better if she remained alive, even if it meant sacrificing her own grandson. The ritual was to be performed at the cult's secret shrine, hidden deep within the forest. Under the guise of a night stroll, Mama Eghosa took Ehi with her. The boy, trusting and oblivious, held his grandmother's hand as they walked under the cover of darkness. They reached the shrine, a clearing surrounded by ancient trees where the cult elders awaited. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and the low hum of chants. The elders stood in a circle, their faces hidden behind masks carved from sacred wood. In the centre of the circle was a stone altar, cold and foreboding. Mama Eghosa's heart pounded in her chest as she led Ehi to the altar. The boy, sensing something was wrong, looked up at his grandmother with wide, questioning eyes. "Mama, where are we?" he asked, his voice trembling. Tears welled up in Mama Eghosa's eyes. She knelt beside him, cupping his face in her hands. "Ehi, my dear child," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You must be brave. This is a place where we pray for our family, for their safety and happiness." Ehi nodded, trusting his grandmother completely. As the chanting grew louder, Mama Eghosa stood and faced the elders. The cult leader, an imposing figure draped in a crimson robe, stepped forward. He extended a ceremonial dagger towards Mama Eghosa, the blade gleaming ominously in the firelight. With trembling hands, she took the dagger. Her vision blurred with tears and her heart felt as though it would break. The elder's chants reached a fever pitch, urging her to complete the ritual. She turned to Ehi, who stood by the altar, looking up at her with innocent eyes. "Mama, are you okay?" he asked, sensing her distress. She could not speak, could not answer him. Her hand shook violently, the dagger slipping in her grasp. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, crushing her spirit. She knew what she had to do, but every fibre of her being rebelled against it. In that moment, a powerful wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the flames of the torches. The chanting stopped abruptly, and a deathly silence fell over the shrine. Mama Eghosa felt a strange presence, an unseen force compelling her to act. She raised the dagger, her hand quivering. But as she looked into Ehi's eyes, she saw not just a child, but her legacy, her bloodline, and the future of her family. A surge of clarity washed over her. How could she sacrifice such a precious life for her own selfish desires? How could she take away the future of an innocent child? With a cry of anguish, Mama Eghosa dropped the dagger. It clattered to the ground, breaking the silence. The elders gasped, and the cult leader stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury. "You have broken the covenant," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. Mama Eghosa stood her ground, her heart pounding. "I cannot do it," she said, her voice resolute. "I cannot take my grandchild's life." The cult leader's expression darkened. "Then you shall face the consequences," he declared. He gestured to the elders, who began to chant once more, their voices rising in a haunting melody. The ground beneath them trembled and a cold wind swept through the clearing. Mama Eghosa felt a strange sensation, as if her very soul was being pulled from her body. She clutched her chest, gasping for breath. The cult leader raised his hands and the chanting grew louder. Just as Mama Eghosa felt she could bear no more, a blinding light filled the clearing. The chanting ceased and the wind died down. The light grew brighter, enveloping Mama Eghosa and Ehi. In that moment she felt a warm, comforting presence, as if a higher power was watching over them. The light faded, and the clearing returned to darkness. Mama Eghosa looked around, disoriented. The cult members had vanished, leaving her and Ehi alone in the forest. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had been spared, but at what cost? Ehi ran to her, wrapping his small arms around her. "Mama, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She hugged him tightly, sobbing into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Ehi," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for bringing you here." As they made their way back to the village, Mama Eghosa felt a deep sense of shame and guilt. She'd come so close to committing an unthinkable act, driven by fear and selfishness. She vowed never to let her family know of the night's events, to protect them from the darkness that had nearly consumed her. The next morning, Mama Eghosa woke to find Ehi playing outside as if nothing had happened. She watched him from the window, her heart heavy with sorrow and regret. The events of the previous night felt like a distant nightmare, one she wished she could forget. But the weight of her decision remained with her. She knew she could never undo what she had done, never erase the memory of that fateful night. She had chosen to spare her grandson, but the price she had paid was her own soul. The cult's curse would follow her, a constant reminder of the life she had almost taken. Mama Eghosa withdrew from the community, becoming a shadow of her former self. She rarely spoke, her once vibrant eyes now dull and lifeless. She spent her days in solitude, praying for forgiveness and redemption. The villagers noticed the change in her, but they could not understand the depth of her pain. Years passed, and Ehi grew into a fine young man, unaware of the dark secret his grandmother carried. Mama Eghosa watched him from afar, her heart swelling with pride and sorrow. She knew she'd done the right thing, but the cost of her decision weighed heavily on her soul. As she neared the end of her life, Mama Eghosa felt a strange sense of peace. She had faced the darkness within her, and though she had faltered, she had ultimately chosen love over fear. She had saved her grandson, sparing him from a terrible fate. On her deathbed, surrounded by her family, Mama Eghosa looked at Ehi, now a grown man with a family of his own. She reached out to him, her hand trembling. He took her hand, tears in his eyes. "Mama, you've always been so strong," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You've always been there for us." Mama Eghosa smiled weakly, tears streaming down her face. "Ehi, my dear," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've made many mistakes in my life, but you are my greatest blessing." With those words, Mama Eghosa took her last breath, her soul finally at peace. She had faced the darkness within her, and though she'd stumbled, she had ultimately chosen love. Her sacrifice, her pain, and her redemption would remain a secret, known only to her and the gods. In the years that followed, Ehi would often think of his grandmother, remembering her as a loving and wise woman who had guided him through life. He never knew the true extent of her sacrifice, the dark secret she had carried to her grave. But he felt her presence in his life, a silent guardian watching over him and his family.